War Marshal Vessendrael gave the order to kill a world, and he gave it the way he signed a fuel requisition. "Cut the atmospheric processes," he said. "All 4 rings. Confirm when it is done." The bridge of the Immaculate did not react. There was no reason to. Below them, the planet called Talek turned slow and brown under a false sky. Its air held up by machines the Elu had begged, borrowed, and welded together over 60 years. Take the machines away and the sky would thin. Give it 6 hours, maybe 7, and the sky would simply stop. Drail watched the clock start. He liked clocks. A clock was honest. It counted down to a thing that was going to happen. And it did not argue. Marshall, his sensor officer, a young Saravan named Teal, leaned toward his console. "We have a contact, edge of the system. Unregistered. Whose? It is not in the Concord ledger. It is not in ours." A pause. "It is small. 1 hull." Drail did not look up from the clock. One ship, Marshall." Behind them, buried in the noise the bridge had learned to ignore, a distress relay from the surface repeated itself again and again and again, the way it had been repeating for a very long time. The relay had a number attached to it. Every automated system that speaks into empty space keeps account of how many times it has spoken, so that whoever finally answers will know how long they were made to wait. Talek's relay had been counting for a long time. That morning it passed 41,000. 41,000 times a small world had said the same thing into the dark. "We need help." 41,000 times the dark had said nothing back. The Elu were used to that. They were a farming people, gentle in the way that survivors are gentle, and they had been left behind before. Generations ago, a larger empire had decided the Elu were in the way of something more important, and had moved them the way you move furniture. They had lost a homeworld then. They had crossed a great deal of cold, empty space, and they had found Talek, a dead rock with no air, and they had made air. 60 years of it. 4 rings of processors, held together with patience. Their elder was named Osu. He was old enough to remember the crossing, old enough that his hands had stopped working the way hands should, and he stood now in the largest of the pressure domes with his face turned up at a sky he could feel getting thinner. They voted, someone told him. A younger Elu, breathless. "The Concord, this morning." "And?" "They wrote us off." Osu nodded slowly, the way a man nods at a thing he has been expecting his whole life. He had been. He was old enough for that too. The vote had not taken long. The Concord Assembly was a careful body, and careful bodies are very good at deciding not to act. Councillor Iren Sa of the Orith had framed it plainly, which she considered a kindness. The Orith were an old and elegant species, tuned across 10,000 years into something they believed was nearly perfect, and Iren Sa had the particular calm of someone who has never once had to do a hard thing with her own hands. "Talek is not viable," she told the assembly. "The Sorovan claim is contested, the population is small, and the cost of intervention exceeds any return. I understand the sentiment. Sentiment is not a budget." She let that settle. "These are acceptable losses." The phrase moved through the chamber, and no one flinched at it. Acceptable losses. It was a clean phrase. It let you set a world down gently, without ever admitting you had dropped it. Only one delegation objected, and it was the one the assembly had learned to tolerate, the way you tolerate a strange relative. The humans. There is a thing worth explaining here, because the people in that chamber did not understand it, and their not understanding it is the whole of what comes next. The galaxy had a low opinion of humanity. It was not cruel about it. It was arithmetic. Humans had come out of their small blue world late with a modest number of ships, and they built ugly, practical things, and they were sentimental in a way the older species found faintly embarrassing. They were always turning up where there was nothing to gain. A famine world, a cracked colony, a ship of refugees no one had claimed. The humans would arrive, and they would help, and they would not ask what it was worth. To a species that measures everything by return, a creature that helps for no return is not admirable. It is a creature that has misunderstood the rules. So when the human envoy stood before the assembly and said the thing humans always said, The chamber did what it always did. "If you leave them," the envoy said. "We will not." Ironsah smiled. It was not unkind. "With what, exactly?" "We have counted your ships." A soft ripple of amusement ran along the tiers. "Go home. Grieve, if you must. This is not a war you can afford." The envoy did not argue. That was the part they should have noticed, and did not. He gathered his notes, bowed his head, and left. Humans, when they have stopped talking, have usually started doing. Down on Talek, in a low building at the edge of the third dome, a human named Ada Reyes was deciding not to leave. She was 34 years old, and she had run the clinic on Talek for 6 years, which on a world like Talek made her close to a permanent fixture. She had a daughter named Nia, 7 years old, safe on a moon 2 systems away, and she wrote to that daughter every night, whether or not there was any way to send it. She was halfway through a letter now. It sat open on the counter beside a cup of tea gone cold. The evacuation order had come an hour ago. Non-essential personnel to the lift platforms. Ada had read it twice, and then she had gone back to setting the arm of an Elu child who had fallen in the panic because the child was in front of her and the lift platform was not. "You should go," Osu told her. Later, when he found her still there. "The order was for your people." "I am my people," Ada said. She did not look up. "Somebody promised you would never do this alone." "I do not remember it coming with an asterisk." She went back to the letter. When the child was splinted, she wrote one more line to Nia. She did not finish it. Back on the Immaculate, the clock had eaten most of an hour, and the one ship had not run. This troubled Drail more than he let the bridge see. A single hull, this far in, with a Saravan siege fleet holding the system, should have done one of 2 things. It should have fled, or it should have died. Instead, it had slid inward, unhurried, and begun to do something his sensor officer could not name at first. "It is mapping us," Teal said finally, "and relaying. All of it. Our positions, our numbers, back out system." "To whom?" Teal did not answer, because just then the ship began to broadcast, and it broadcast in the open, on every band in Concord Standard, so that every vessel in the system and every dome on the surface would hear it at once. It was not a threat. Drail had braced for a threat. He would have known what to do with a threat. It was 4 words, calm in a human voice, repeated. "You will never stand alone." On the surface, in a thinning sky, 41,000 had become 41,109, and for the first time in a very long time, something in the dark had finally spoken back. Drail looked at the clock. For the first time that day, he did not entirely trust it. The clock kept counting, and Drail kept his eyes off it, and that alone told him something had gone wrong with his day. The one ship still had not fired. It circled the outer markers of the system, on a wide, patient arc, and it went on, saying its 4 words into the open air, and it went on doing the other thing, the thing Teal had finally put a name to. It was measuring. It was writing everything down. The exact position of every Sarovan hull, the reach of their weapons, the seams in their formation, and it was pushing all of it out system to somebody Drail could not see. He ordered a strike, a precise one. He was not a wasteful commander, and he did not intend to spend a squadron chasing a single ghost, so he tasked one heavy cruiser, the Vael Ren, to close the distance and end the thing. The Vael Ren closed. It fired. And the human ship was not where the shot went. It was a small thing, a shift of a few degrees, a half-second early, as though the human hull had known the shot was coming before the gunner did. The cruiser corrected and fired again, and again the ship was already elsewhere, drifting sideways with the unhurried ease of a thing that has all day. "It is reading our firing solutions," Teal said quietly. "Off our own targeting emissions. Before we shoot." "That is not possible on that hull," Drail said. "It has no fleet-grade array. Look at it. It is a freighter with teeth." "Yes, Marshal." Teal did not say the obvious thing, which was that the freighter with teeth was making the Vael Ren look like it was fighting in the dark. Drail had spent 40 years learning the shape of a losing enemy. He knew the panic in a formation that was about to break, the way ships pulled too close together, the way commanders started spending lives to buy minutes. He knew none of that was happening here. What was happening here was a single human vessel doing unhurried work under the guns of a siege fleet and being, of all things, calm. The calm was the part he could not file. An enemy that is losing is loud. An enemy that is winning is loud in a different way. An enemy that is neither, that simply goes about its business as though your fleet is weather it has already checked and dressed for. That was new. He was still turning it over when the second contact arrived. "Marshal!" Teal's voice changed. The one ship. It was never one ship. The outsystem dock, where the human vessel had been pushing all its careful measurements, answered. Not with a fleet. Drael would have understood a fleet. It answered with a spread of contacts, sliding in past the markers. And they were not warships. They were bulk hulls. Broad, slow, ugly, unarmed or nearly so. The kind of ship you build to move grain or ore or people. A convoy. Relief tonnage. Teal read off. Transports. Tenders. Medical hulls. A light escort. They are not coming for us, Marshal. They are coming for the surface. Drael sat with that, somewhere behind him, in the noise he had trained himself not to hear. Talek's relay ticked upward again. 41,300. Somebody, at last, was on their way to answer it, and the answer was arriving in freighters. In the human command room, aboard the flagship that had not yet shown itself, Fleet Admiral Mara Okonkwo stood over a slow-turning display of the Talek system and asked exactly one question. "How far out is the group?" 2 hours to the surface, Admiral. The escort can be there sooner. The escort holds with the transports. She said it without heat. We are not here to trade shots. We are here to get people off a rock. Shots are what happens if they make us. She was not a large presence. She did not raise her voice, and she did not fill a room the way admirals in stories fill rooms. What she did was worse, if you were the one facing her, because she gave the strong impression of someone who had already read the end of the day and found it acceptable and was simply waiting for the rest of you to catch up. Her officers had learned that the quieter she got, the closer the thing was to done. "The lead ship is taking fire," an officer noted. "The long haul. One cruiser working her over. Is she still lifting people?" "She is." "Then she is doing her job." Okonkwo did not look away from the display. "Tell her to tighten up and keep lifting." That was the whole of the order. It went out, and on the edge of the system, a battered relief hull named the Long Haul pulled her formation in a little closer around herself, the way you hunch a shoulder against rain, and went on, pulling Elu off the surface, while a Saravan cruiser hammered her flank. 2 systems of council, 1 flagship, and a freighter under fire, and none of them raised their voices. That was the thing the galaxy kept getting wrong about humans. It heard the sentiment and assumed there would be noise. There was never any noise. There was just people, quietly, refusing to leave. In the Concord Assembly, there was a great deal of noise. Councillor Irensa had not expected to be discussing Talek again so soon, and she did not enjoy it. The humans had gone and done the thing they had said they would do. And now there was a convoy in a written-off system, and the Assembly, which had voted so cleanly to look away, was being made to look. "They are pouring hulls into a dead world," she said. "Grain tenders, medical ships, against a Saravan siege fleet." She spread her fine hands. "I want the record to show that this is not courage. It is a failure to do arithmetic. They will lose those ships, they will lose those people, and Talek will die on schedule, regardless. We made the correct decision. Sentiment does not change a sum." Most of the chamber murmured its agreement because most of the chamber had voted with her and did not care to have been wrong. But not all of it. A second-tier delegate, from a small and unremarkable species that had itself once been close to the edge of somebody's ledger, spoke up from the back tiers. He was not important. He knew he was not important. He asked his question anyway. "Counselor, you said no one comes for the weak. You said it was a law like gravity." He hesitated. "There is a convoy in the system right now, taking fire and not leaving." He looked around the chamber. "If it is a law, Why is it being broken in front of us? Irensaw smiled because she always smiled, but it took her a half-second longer than usual to find it. Because they have misunderstood the rules, she said. That is all. A misunderstanding is not a miracle. She moved to the next item, but the question sat in the chamber after she had moved on. The way questions do. On Talek, the sky was going wrong. You could see it if you knew how to look. The light through the dome had a thinness to it now, a pale, drawn quality, and the pressure alarms had stopped being a warning and started being a fact. 2 of the 4 processor rings were already dead. Ada Reyes had felt it in her chest an hour ago, the small labor of breathing that meant the machines were losing. The clinic was full. It was full of Elu, who could not reach the lift platforms, the old, the injured, the ones with children who would not go without them, and Ada had made the decision an hour ago without ever quite deciding it, which was to be the last one out or not out at all. She moved between the cots the way she always did, steady, unhurried, and if her hands shook, it was only when no one could see them. Osu found her by the counter, where the letter still lay open beside the cold tea. "Your ships are here," he said. "Freighters. My people are seeing them lift the eastern domes. They are not my ships." Ada capped a vial, set it down. "They are just ships. I told you it was not going to come with an asterisk. You could go east, to the platforms. There is time. There is not, and you know there is not, and I am not walking past 40 people to save the trouble of one." She said it lightly. She had a way of saying heavy things lightly, the way her whole species did, as though gravity were a matter of tone. "Get the ones who can walk toward the East Dome. I will bring the rest when the lift comes." He looked at her a moment longer. Then he did as she asked, because there was nothing else useful to do, and because he had learned, over a long life of being left behind, to know the difference between a person who was going to leave and a person who was not. Ada went back to the letter. She wrote one more line to Nia. "Mama loves you more than the whole sky," she wrote, which was a thing she said, and she meant to finish the thought. And then a runner came through the door shouting that the West Dome had lost pressure, and she left the sentence where it was and went high above on the Immaculate. Drayle watched the ugly little freighters slide toward his dying world and begin, under his guns, to unload. "They are landing," Teal said, and there was something in his voice that had not been there that morning. "They mean to do it, Marshal." "All of it." Drayle looked at the wide, slow hulls and at the one small ship that had never stopped saying its 4 words and at the clock that had less than 3 hours left on it, and he found that he was no longer entirely sure what he was watching win. "How many ships do they have out there?" he said. It was not quite a question. "Behind the freighters. How many?" Teal worked his console. Then he stopped working it. "I cannot get a count, Marshal," he said. "Every time I think I have the edge of it, it goes further out." Drayle decided to stop the freighters, and he decided it, the way a reasonable commander decides anything, which is to say he did the arithmetic first. The relief convoy had no business surviving a siege fleet. It was slow, it was soft, and it was tied to the surface now, committed, hulls open and unloading. All he had to do was strike the tethered ships while they could not run, and the humans would learn the lesson the galaxy had been trying to teach them for 100 years. Sentiment does not stop a warhead. "Target the grounded transports," he said. "Full weight. End it." The Immaculate spoke, and so did her escorts. And the fire that went down toward Talek was not precise this time, and was not meant to be. It was meant to be a number, and the number landed. One of the human hulls, a broad medical tender named the Steadfast, took a strike across her open flank while she was still bringing the injured aboard, and she burned, and she did not lift off. Drayle waited for the convoy to break. That was what convoys did. You bloodied one hull and the rest scattered, because the whole logic of a soft ship is that it runs. The convoy did not break. It tightened. The other hulls pulled in around the burning Steadfast, and the escort, which had been holding wide and quiet, slid between the wounded ships and the incoming fire, and simply stood there, taking its meant for the transports while the transports went on loading. Nobody ran. Nobody even seemed to hurry. They closed ranks around their own dead the way a body closes around a wound, and they kept doing the work. "They are still lifting people," Teal said. He sounded like a man reading something in a language he had thought he understood. We hit them and they closed up and they are still lifting people. Drail had seen a great many enemies bleed. He had never seen one refuse to notice. Aboard the human flagship, Okonkwo watched the steadfast burn on her display and was silent for a moment, and her officers knew that particular silence and left it alone. "Crew," she said at last. Most got clear. "We lost the surgical team. We lost her master." A pause. 14. Okonkwo took the number the way you take a weight you have carried before and will carry again. She did not make a speech of it. She looked at the 14 for exactly as long as 14 deserved, which was longer than a Saravan would have understood and shorter than grief wanted, and then she lifted her eyes back to the whole of the board, because there were 40,000 more people under that thinning sky, and the 14 would want her looking at them. "Get a tech team on the siege net," she said. "The interdiction field. I want a hole in it." Her engineering officer glanced up. "Sarovan siege dampening, Admiral. Standard doctrine says that field is a 2-week problem. To crack it clean, you would need—" "I know what doctrine says." Okonkwo almost smiled. "Doctrine was written by people who quit it hard. Get me the hole." The tech team went to work. They were not soldiers. Most of them. They were the people humans always seem to have too many of and everyone else too few. The ones who fixed the thing that was not supposed to be fixable because no one had told them it was time to stop trying. They pulled the field apart the way you pull apart a bad knot, patiently, from the inside, feeding everything they learned back into the fleet, and what doctrine had called a 2-week problem began, under human hands, to come apart in hours. It was not a weapon. That was the thing the Saravan never managed to file correctly, then or later. There was no secret gun, no hidden fleet of terror. There was only a species that treated an impossible problem as a scheduling matter and outworked it. Up on the Immaculate, Drail felt the first place in his siege begin to soften and did not yet know why. Below, the sky was nearly gone. 3 of the 4 processor rings were dead. The domes had gone to emergency pressure, which was another way of saying they had begun the slow business of failing gracefully, and the light through them had the flat gray color of air that is running out. The Elu who could be moved were being moved, hauled toward the east platforms where the human tenders came down and lifted them away in loads, old ones first, children with them, and it was working in the ragged way that impossible things work when enough stubborn people refuse to admit they are impossible. The clinic at the edge of the 3rd dome was in the wrong place for any of it. Drail's second salvo, the one meant to break the convoy, had not only killed the steadfast, part of it had walked across the 3rd dome, across the low buildings at its edge, and one of those low buildings was the clinic, where Ada Reyes had decided to be the last one out, or not out at all. On the flagship board it registered as nothing, a flicker, a structure gone dark at the edge of a dome that was already dying. On the ground it was the roof coming down. There's a plain way to say what happened, and the plain way is the only honest one. The strike took the eastern half of the clinic. It took it fast. The people who were near the doors got out, some of them, and the people who were not did not, and Ada Reyes had been moving toward the back where the ones who could not walk were waiting, which is to say she had been where a person like her is always standing when a roof comes down, between the danger and the people who cannot get away from it. The calm from the clinic ended mid-word. One of the relief coordinators up on a tender heard it end, and marked the position, and logged it the way you log a thing you already know the answer to, and moved to the next call because there were 40,000 more, and she could not stop for one. That is not coldness. That is what it costs to keep a promise at scale. You mark the ones you have lost, and you do not let yourself feel them yet, because if you feel them now you will stop, and if you stop, more of them join the list. So the coordinator logged Ada Reyes as lost, and the number of the living went down by 1 and did not pause, and the work went on. Osu was at the east platform when it happened. He felt it, more than saw it, the particular silence of a place that had been full of a person, and now was not. He turned back toward the 3rd dome. A younger Elu caught his arm. "You cannot go back. The lift is here." "Elder, the lift is here." "I know," Osu said. He looked at the dark place where the clinic had been. I know. He got on the lift. Because there was nothing to be done, and because the woman who had refused to walk past 40 people would not have thanked him for dying to walk back toward one, but he took the number of her with him, up through the failing sky. The way you carry something you are not ready to set down. In the Concord Assembly, the humans came back. They did not come back to plead. That had been the morning's business, and the morning was over. A single human officer entered the chamber and set a data slate on the speaker's rail and said, without preamble, "You should see what your acceptable losses look like from the inside." And then he played it. The relay. Talek's distress relay, the one that had been counting into the dark for 60 years, run forward at speed so the chamber could hear what 40,000 calls sounded like stacked together. It was not dramatic. That was what made it unbearable. It was the same 4 seconds of a small voice asking for help. Over and over. 41,000 times. Times with nothing after any of them. That is the sound, the officer said, of this body doing arithmetic. Irensa rose because it was expected of her, and because silence would have been worse. "This is theater," she said. "A recording is not a rebuttal. The math has not changed. Those ships will still lose. That world will still. That world is being evacuated," the officer said, "as of an hour ago. Against your siege fleet, by grain freighters." He let that sit. "You told us we had misunderstood the rules. We heard you." He picked up the slate. "We just don't agree. The rules are worth understanding." He left. The relay kept playing after he had gone, because he had left it running on purpose. 4 seconds of a small voice over and over, into a chamber that had voted so cleanly to make it stop. The second-tier delegate from the back tiers did not say anything this time. He just sat and listened to the count, and somewhere around the 30,000th repetition, Irenza asked quietly for it to be switched off. And for the first time all day, she did not smile when she said it. On the Immaculate, Teal turned from his console with an expression Drayle had not seen on him before. "Marshal, the main body." He swallowed. "It is not out system anymore. It is arriving." Drayle looked at the display, and where there had been the edge of a thing he could not count, there was now the front of it, sliding in, past the outer markers in a line that did not seem to have an end. Not freighters this time. Not one ship with teeth. The clock on the wall said 2 hours to a dead world. Drayle looked at it and understood, all at once and too late, that he had been watching the wrong clock all day. The human main body came into the Talek system, the way a tide comes in, which is to say, without hurry and without any doubt about the outcome. Drayle had spent the day revising his estimate of these people upward, and he revised it again now, and it was still not enough. They were not a fleet in the shape, he understood. There was no vast dreadnought at the center to kill. No single spine he could break and watch the rest lose heart. There were only ships, more of them than his count had allowed for. Plain and purposeful, sliding into the gaps his siege had left and closing them one after another with the calm efficiency of people locking up a building at the end of the day. "Formation?" he asked. "They are not forming, Marshal." Teal's voice had gone flat. The flatness of a man who has stopped being surprised because surprise costs energy he no longer has. "They are just taking positions. Around us. Around the freighters. Around the surface." A pause. "They have the range on everything. All of it. At once." Drayle understood siege warfare. He had made his career on the patient mathematics of it. The slow closing of options the moment an enemy realizes that every direction he might run has already been spent. He understood it so well that he recognized it now, from the inside, done to him, at a speed he would not have believed possible that morning. He gave the order any commander gives when the noose is closing, which was to fight the noose. His fleet turned its weight outward and struck at the human line in a dozen places at once, hard, the way you strike. When striking is the only dignity you have left, the human line took the blows and adapted. That was the word for it. Not endured, not absorbed. Adapted. The first Sarovan salvos found their marks, because the humans had not yet seen those particular weapons at those particular ranges, and a handful of human hulls went dark. And then within the hour, the same salvos stopped finding anything, because the humans had taken what killed their people and turned it into a solution and pushed that solution to every ship on the line, so that the second time Drail reached for a tactic, the humans had already read it, filed it, and closed the door on it. He threw a decade of Sarovan doctrine at them across that hour. Every trick, every reserve, every clever cruelty the siege manuals held. And one by one, he watched the humans meet each one, learn it and neutralize it faster than he could invent the next, until he was not commanding a battle anymore so much as feeding new ideas into a machine that ate them and got better. "This is not possible," he said once to no one. "No fleet learns this fast." "It is not one fleet learning, Marshal," Teal said quietly. He had worked it out. Someone on that bridge had to. It is all of them learning at once. Whatever one ship sees, they all know immediately. We are not fighting a line. We are fighting a thing that shares a mind and never forgets. That was as close as any Sarovan came, that day, to understanding what humanity actually was. Not a weapon, not a hidden terror. A species that built and rebuilt and passed every hard lesson instantly to every set of hands it had, and simply did not stop, and had more hands than you could kill in the time it took them to grow new ones. The Immaculate shuddered as her outer batteries went dark, killed cleanly, surgically, without a single strike straying toward the crew decks. Drail noticed that even in the middle of losing, the humans were taking his fleet apart, the way a surgeon takes apart a problem, cutting exactly what needed cutting and nothing else. His engines, his weapons, his ability to reach the surface, all of it removed with a precision that was somehow worse than savagery, because savagery he could have called cruelty and understood. Within 2 hours of the main body's arrival, the Sarovan siege fleet was not defeated. It was held. Every ship still lived. Not one could move, not one could fire, not one could reach the dying world it had come to kill. Drail sat at the center of a fleet that had been disarmed rather than destroyed, and he waited for the second half of it, the part where they finished him, because that was the part his own doctrine promised. You spare nothing you have already beaten. A live enemy is a future war. He waited to die and gave the order for his crews to make their peace, and watched the human guns hold their aim on him. And then the human guns did not fire. A single channel opened to the Immaculate, in the open again, the way everything the humans had done that day had been done in the open. It was the same calm voice that had said 4 words into the dark all day. Kongfo, War Marshal Drail. She had his name. Of course she had his name. Your fleet is finished. You know that. I know that. Let's not spend anyone else pretending otherwise. Drail straightened in his chair. Because there is a way to lose that a soldier owes himself. Then finish it. No! The word sat there. He had not planned for the word. Your engines are dead, Okonkwo went on, unhurried. Your weapons are gone. Your crews are alive. I'm opening a corridor. Out system. Wide and clean. Any ship of yours that wants to carry its people home can take it. No one fires on you while you go. You have my word, and you have watched all day what my word is worth. Teal looked up from his console, and the look on his face was something like fear, but not of dying, of a thing he could not fit into the shape of the universe he had been raised in. Why? Drail said. It was not gratitude. He was not capable of gratitude yet. It was the honest bafflement of a man watching arithmetic break. You have beaten me. Doctrine is clear. A spared enemy is a future enemy. You're handing me back to fight you again. Maybe. Okonkwo did not sound troubled by it. That is a risk we take on purpose. Let me tell you the difference between us, Marshal, because I do not think you have understood it, and I think you should. She let a moment pass, and when she spoke again, the calm had an edge under it. Not anger. Something harder and older than anger. You let a world die because saving it cost too much. You ran the numbers, and the numbers said those people were not worth the fuel. We came, and we bled, and we lost the steadfast and 14 of ours and more than 14 before this is done. Because a long time ago we told these people they would never stand alone, and where we come from, that sentence does not have a price after it. A beat. You chose to kill a world. We are choosing to let your crews go home. Do not ever let anyone tell you those are the same kind of choice. Drael sat with it, and it went into him deeper than any strike his fleet had taken, because he could find no flaw in it. And finding flaws in the enemy was the one thing he had always been able to do. There is a corridor, Okonkwo said. It is open now. It closes when your last ship is through. Take your people home, War Marshal. And then quieter, the thing that undid him, because it was offered without any triumph at all. And when you get there, you tell them what you saw. Not that you lost, that you were let go. There is a difference, and your assembly is about to need to understand it. The channel closed. Drael looked at the corridor on his display. A clean lane through the human line, held open by the same guns that had disarmed him and had not killed him, and he understood that he was being handed something far heavier than a defeat. A defeat he could have carried home in silence. This he would have to carry home and explain. He gave the order to withdraw. His ships, one by one, limped into the lane the humans held open, and no human gun so much as tracked them as they passed. And every Sarovan on every bridge watched the surface of Talek slide by beneath them, where ugly little freighters were still coming down and lifting the living away. Load after load under a sky that the humans had bought back 1 hour at a time. Teal watched it until it was out of sight. "Marshal," he said, "what do we tell the assembly?" Drael was quiet for a long moment. "The truth," he said at last, and found that the word tasted strange, because he had spent the whole day certain he already knew what the truth was, and had been wrong about it since before the clock began to count. Drael brought the truth home, and the Concord Assembly did not want it. He stood before them in the great chamber where, that same morning, they had voted so cleanly to look away, and he was not the sort of witness they had expected. He was a Sarovan war marshal, decorated, unbeaten across a career built on cold arithmetic, and he had come to tell them that the arithmetic was wrong. There is nothing a careful body trusts less than one of its own hard men arriving soft. I held a world in a closed fist, he told them. 4 processor rings. A siege net doctrine calls a 2-week problem. A dead planet on a clock. By every measure I have ever used, Talek was already gone. He paused. Then a single freighter arrived, and by nightfall my fleet was disarmed and my crews were being escorted home through a corridor the enemy held open on purpose. They did not lose to me. I need this body to understand that I lost to them, and then they let me go, and being let go is heavier than the losing. Counselor Irensa rose, because the room needed her to, and because if she did not speak, first someone might notice that she had nothing to say. "War Marshal, you have had a difficult day. No one doubts your courage." She spread her fine hands, the old gesture. But a battle lost is not a law repealed. The humans spend enormous cost to delay the death of a world with nothing to offer. They will bleed themselves pale on sentiment, as they always do. And in a generation there will be no humans left to embarrass us. The math holds. Talek was and remains an acceptable loss. She said the phrase the way she had said it that morning. Clean, weightless. A phrase built to set a world down gently. This time it did not land clean, because the human officer who had come to answer her had brought the relay again, and this time he did not play the whole of it. He let one number stand in the silence of the chamber, spoken plainly, so that it could not be argued with. 41,612, he said. That is how many times Talek called for help before anyone came. 60 years of it. Every one of those calls reached this body. Not one of them was answered by anyone in this room. He looked along the tiers, unhurried. You have been calling that number an acceptable loss all day. I want you to hear it out loud, the whole of it, because a loss is only acceptable to the ones who did not have to do the losing. 41,612 times. That is not a budget line. That is a people asking. into a dark that this chamber chose to keep dark. There is a thing that happens to a comfortable phrase when you finally attach a number to it. The number does not let it stay comfortable. Acceptable losses had been easy to say when the losses were an abstraction, a category, a tidy word that stood in for the mess so that no one had to look at it. Now there was a count in the room, 6 digits of it, and the count had a sound, and the phrase could not cover it anymore. Iron Sa did not sit down, but she did not go on either. The second-tier delegate, from the back tiers, the one who had asked his small question twice and been smiled at both times, watched her not go on and understood that he had been right and took no pleasure in it. Then the human officer said the thing that would leave the chamber, travel outward across the Concord, and end up carved into the base of a statue on Talek 2 years later. Though none of them knew that yet. You measured us wrong, he said. The whole galaxy did. You counted our ships. You should have counted our word. He let it sit, and then he gave them the rest of it, the part that was not a rebuke, but a definition. The part the Aureth had never once thought to write into their 10,000 years of optimization. Because it had never occurred to them that it was a strength. You keep waiting for us to run out. Run out of ships, run out of patience, run out of the sentiment you think is a weakness. You are going to keep waiting. He was not loud. None of them ever were. You can beat a fleet. Fleets end. You cannot beat a species that decided a long time ago that no one gets left behind. That is not a fleet. That is not a weapon you can disarm or a line you can break. It is a decision, and it does not get tired, and it does not run the numbers, and it will still be making itself long after every ship in this chamber is scrap. No one answered him. There was nothing in the Concord's long and careful history that had prepared it to answer a thing like that. Up on the far tiers, Drail listened and felt the last of his old certainty go, and did not grieve it as much as he expected to. He had spent a career believing that strength was the capacity to spend, that the strong were the ones who could pay any cost and feel none of it. He had watched that day, a species that was strong, precisely because it refused to treat certain costs as payable at all. It had cost them the steadfast. It had cost them 14, and more than 14. And they had looked at the bill, and they had not tried to make it smaller, because to them the whole point was that some things you did not put a price on, and a promise to the abandoned was one of them. That was the reckoning, and it was not delivered by a gun. But the humans were not finished, and what they did next was the part Drail would spend the rest of his life turning over, because it was the part he had no framework for at all. They did not seize anything. By every rule Drail had ever served under, this was the moment of the taking. They had beaten a Saravan fleet, embarrassed the Concord, and stood in the great chamber with the moral high ground and a demonstrated ability to hold an entire siege line in a closed hand. This was where the victor rewrote the treaty in its own favor. This was where the price got extracted. The human officer set nothing on the rail but the relay, and asked for nothing but that Talek be struck from the ledger of the written off. And then he turned, not to the assembly, but up toward the far tiers, to where the defeated Sarovan war marshal sat, and he said the last thing anyone in that chamber expected. The offer stands for you too, Marshal. Drail did not understand at first. What offer? The one we made Talek. The human said it as though it were obvious, as though it had always been obvious, as though it were the simplest arithmetic in the galaxy, and everyone else had merely been doing it wrong. You will never stand alone. We do not put an asterisk on it. Not for the people who deserve it. And a different rule for the people who do not. That is not how a promise works. If the day comes that the Sarovan are the ones on the clock, the ones this chamber has decided are too expensive to save, you send the call. A pause. We will be the ship that comes. It should have sounded like weakness. In the mouth of any species the Concord understood, it would have been weakness. A soft creature confusing surrender for grace. But there was nothing soft in the human standing at the rail, and every ship in the Sarovan withdrawal had passed close enough to the human line to know it, and so the offer landed as what it actually was, which was the most confident thing anyone had said in that chamber all day. Only something that was completely unafraid of running out could afford to make the same promise to its enemies that it made to its friends. Iron Saw found her voice at last, and it was smaller than it had been that morning. You would extend it even to the fleet that came to kill that world. Especially to them, the human said. A promise you only keep for the people you like is not a promise. It is a preference. We stopped confusing those a long time ago. He gathered the relay from the rail. That is the part your body has never understood about us, counselor. You think we help because we are soft. We help because we decided that the alternative, the ledger, the acceptable losses, the sky you keep dark to save the cost of the light is a thing we would rather die than become. And we have more people willing to die than you have arithmetic. Think about that the next time a number asks you for help. He left the chamber. He left the relay running one more time. 4 seconds of a small voice. And this time no one asked for it to be switched off. They let it play, all 41,612 of them, into a body that had voted that morning to make it stop. And by the end, there was not a delegate in the tiers who could still hear the phrase acceptable losses without hearing the count underneath it. Drell rose while it was still playing. He had a fleet to see home and a report to write, and he was beginning to suspect a great many years ahead of him, in which to reconsider everything he had ever believed about strength. He stopped on his way out, beside the second-tier delegate, from the back tiers, the small, unimportant one who had asked the question no one wanted. You were right, Drell said. It was a law being broken in front of us. I simply had the law backward. I thought the law was that no one comes for the weak. He looked back at the empty rail where the human had stood. The law is that they do, and that the ones who come are the ones you should have been afraid of all along. He went out to bring his people home through a galaxy that had, in the space of a single day, quietly changed shape around him. Though most of it did not know that yet. Far below, past the reach of the chamber and its careful voices, Talek turned under a sky that was thickening again, breath by breath, as the last of the freighters came and went. And in the ruin at the edge of the third dome, where a clinic had stood and a roof had come down, something moved that everyone with a ledger had already marked as lost. The sky over Talek came back the way it had gone, slowly, machine by machine, breath by breath. The humans stayed after the fighting stopped, which surprised no one who had watched them fight and surprised everyone who had not. The freighters that had come to lift people away now came down full instead of empty, carrying the 4th processor ring in pieces, and the parts to mend the 3 the Sorovan had killed, and the ugly, practical people who knew how to bolt it all back together. They did not make a ceremony of it. They treated the resurrection of a world the way they seemed to treat everything, as a job that was in front of them and therefore got done. The Elu came home in the same loads that had carried them out. Osu was on one of the first ships down. He walked out onto ground that could hold air again and stood for a while with his ruined old hands at his sides, breathing, which is a thing you only notice you are grateful for after you have watched it become a luxury. He went to the third dome because he had a number to carry there and set down, and he was not looking forward to setting it down. The clinic was a ruin. The eastern half of it had come down under the Saravan salvo and stayed down, a low heap of the plain gray material the Elu built everything from, and a human recovery crew was working through it without much hope and without any hurry, because working through it slowly and gently was the last courtesy they had left to offer whoever was under it. That is where they found the thing the ledgers had already closed the book on. She was under the collapsed frame of the back room, in the gap a fallen support had made over her, where she had gone when the roof came down because the ones who could not walk were back there and she had put herself between them and the ceiling, out of what appeared to be simple habit. 3 of the Elu she had been shielding were alive. So past all reasonable arithmetic was Ada Reyes. The plain way to say it is the honest way. She should not have been. The strike had taken the building and most of the people in the front of it, and she had been closer to it than any of them, and the only reason there was a person to pull out of the gap instead of a name to add to a list was a fallen beam that had landed at an angle instead of flat. There is no lesson in that. Sometimes the beam lands at an angle, She was hurt, badly, in the flat clinical way the humans catalogued their own wounded. A crushed arm and cracked ribs and a long time in the dark, not knowing if anyone was coming. But she was breathing, and when the recovery crew reached her, the first thing she did, before she let them move her, was ask about the three behind her, and the second thing she did was ask whether the letter had made it out. It had not. It was still on the counter, or what was left of the counter, under a film of grey dust, open to the last line she had written before a runner came through the door, and she got up and went. "Mama loves you more than the whole sky." She had never finished the sentence. Someone from the recovery crew found the slate and cleaned it and carried it out after her, and she held it in her one working hand on the flight up to the tender, and finished the thought she had left unfinished when the West Dome lost pressure. She did not tell anyone what she added. Some promises are between a person and one other person and do not belong to the story. Osu found her on the tender, later when the worst of the mending had been done and she was allowed to be spoken to. He sat down beside her, and for a while neither of them said anything, because they were both people who knew that the important things do not need much said over them. "I told you it would not come with an asterisk," Ada said, finally. Her voice was rough. She was smiling anyway, the small, tired human smile that heavy things get said behind. "You did," Osu said. "I did not entirely believe you." He looked out the port, at the world thickening back into life below them. "I have been left behind before. It teaches you not to believe the promise. I am too old to learn a new lesson. And then, you people made me learn it anyway. That is the whole idea," Ada said, and closed her eyes and rested. Far out past the markers, on the long road home, War Marshal Vessendrael watched his fleet limp toward Sorovan space and turned the day over in his mind as he would go on, turning it for years. He had a report to write that would end his career in the shape it had been and begin something else. He did not have a name for yet. He had a phrase to unlearn. He kept reaching for acceptable losses the way you reach for a tool you have used your whole life, and every time he reached for it now, he heard the count under it. 6 digits of a small voice asking into the dark, and the tool came apart in his hand. Teal found him on the bridge in the quiet hours of the crossing. "Marshal, may I ask you something?" "You may." "When we withdrew, through the corridor," Teal hesitated. "We passed close to the surface. I watched them come down. The freighters! After the fighting, they were rebuilding the very machines we had destroyed. The atmospheric rings. They were putting the sky back." He shook his head slowly. "We spent everything to take a world apart. They spent more than we did to put it back together. And they seemed, if anything, happier doing the second thing." He looked at his commander. "I do not understand these people, Marshal." Drael was quiet for a moment. Out beyond the port, Talek had long since dropped from view, but he could still see it if he closed his eyes. The small brown world under its returning sky, and the ugly ships coming down full. "No," he said, "neither do I, but I have stopped making the mistake of thinking that means they are weak." He watched the stars slide past. "We measured them the way this whole galaxy measured them. We counted their ships. We should have counted their word." He said the last part almost to himself. He had heard a human say it in the Great Chamber, and he had carried it home. Because some sentences you carry home, whether or not you want to. They will still be keeping that promise, long after the last of my kind has forgotten why we ever thought it was foolish. Down on Talek, the work went on into the evening, which was a real evening now, with a real sky over it. Somewhere in the noise, the relay finally went quiet. No one gave the order. It simply stopped, the way a thing stops when the reason for it has been answered at last, after 41,612 tries. A human technician noticed it go silent and made a small note of it, and went back to the more interesting problem of getting the 4th ring online before the temperature dropped. And on a tender, full of the living, above a world that had been written off and had not stayed written off, an ordinary woman with a broken arm held a half-finished letter to a daughter she would get home to, and beside her, an old man breathed the air she had refused to leave him without, and neither of them said anything more about it, because the promise had already been kept, quietly, the way the humans always seem to keep it. No one gets left behind. You will never stand alone. There was more work in the morning. There always was. That was the whole of it, really. That was the thing the galaxy had never understood.